So we've gone through a bit of preamble. We've had an introduction to what Star Wars Tracker is. We've created an account. I've gone through some of the settings that you can change about your account. So with all of that out of the way, I think we're ready to actually start looking at Star Wars Tracker properly and having a look at some of the features that are available to you to use. So I'm going to begin with having a look at the price guides. And today I thought I'd start with the price guide that most people are interested in, and that's the loose figure price guide. So we're back here at the main landing page here, and what we see is the section of the portfolio section up the top here, but then below that we've got the section about the price guides, and you kind of get, as a starting point, just an indication of how many prices have been collected in Star Wars Tracker so far. So as of today, in mid-September 2024, there's just over 450,000 prices that have been collected, and you've got a little bit more of a breakdown of how they're made up over here. So it's a loose figures that make up the bulk of the prices in the price guide. And then you've got carded figures and accessory prices. Accessory here means it's just a catch-all for vehicles and play sets and mini rigs and the micro collection. Essentially anything that's not a loose figure or a carded figure or a Power of the Force coin. The coins get their own special price guide there. So a bit over 100,000 accessory prices, 80,000 carded figure prices, and a bit over 12,000 Power of the Force coin prices. That's the totality of the price guide at the moment. And then below that, you just get a few randomly selected pricing tiles just to pique your interest and give you just an easy way to click into something that you might find interesting. But otherwise, up the top here, you can go to price guides via this link here, or all guides on this button here. So let's go up the top here and click price guides here. And then on this page, you get a jump off point to launch into any of the price guides that you're interested in. So they're broken down into a loose figure guide, a carded figure guide, and then below that we've got the vehicles guide and so on down below. But in this video, I'm going to show you the loose figure price guides. And to begin that, I'm going to click this button here, which is Browse All Loose Figures. And on this page here, you get access to all the loose figures that I track within Star Wars Tracker. So it's the set of 96 figures, which is generally considered a good run of loose figures. There are lots of variants that people can go after. So this set of 96 is just a basic amount. So it's the figures that you'd see on the back of a 92 back card, plus the extra R2-D2 figures and Yak Face and the extra C-3PO figure with the removable limbs. That makes up the 96. But there's actually a bit over 120 figures that Star Wars Tracker tracks, and so those include things like a vinyl cape Jawa, the Lando Calrissian with the smile and without the smile. So just a couple of the more generally recognized variants. They make up the full set of figures that are tracked in Star Wars Tracker. So on this screen here, you can scroll through and you can see all of those figures, and you get just very basic pricing information at this point. But to go in and get the full details, you actually click on one of the pricing tiles, and then that'll take you to a much richer, deeper view of what's going on. But before I do that, I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly change my currency that Star Wars Tracker uses for me, and I'm going to set it to USD. Essentially because I know that there's a lot of American collectors that use Star Wars Tracker, and a lot of people from around the world buy from American markets, whether that's fellow collectors in America or off eBay.com, the American eBay. So just for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to use USD just to kind of to choose something that a lot of you will be using. So here we have the same view expressed with US dollars instead. And what I'm going to do to go through the price guide is I think I'm going to choose a well-known figure, a figure that most people are very familiar with and maybe even have in their collection and may even want to buy multiples of, and that's Boba Fett. All right, so just clicking on that now brings up a much richer set of results and prices and statistics to go through. So let's just go through it at a slow pace, and I'll explain what's exactly going on here. So up the top of the screen, you always have this blue and white banner, which allows you to add one of these to your portfolios if you like. So as you browse the price guides, and if you see something that you have, you've got a chance to actually add it to your portfolios at that point in time. So because we've just set up, what it's saying is create a portfolio to start tracking this item in your collection. So we'd need to set up a portfolio first, and then we can add it to a portfolio. But I'll go over that stuff in a later video about the portfolio side of things. But below that, we have a stock image of the Boba Fett figure. And so there's stock images of all the loose figures in Star Wars Tracker, just as a visual reference of which figure it is. And the next section is a total sales and volume for this figure. So what this is just a very general fun stat, which says that over the course of adding prices into Star Wars Tracker, I've recorded 5,381 sale instances of this figure, and the total amount of money that they have come to is 314,000 US dollars. So it's just a bit of a fun statistic. It doesn't really mean anything more than that. This next section, the universal rankings, this is a bit more interesting. So what I've got here are two flavors of ranking. One of them is the availability, and the other is how valuable the item is. And each of those are broken down into rankings for the current year. So as of today, the current year is 2024. And then you've also got the same ranking over the lifetime. So I think these can be quite interesting just to see if there's a change in trend for the current year we're in, as compared to the overall lifetime trend that we see for that item. So for Boba Fett here, it's got an availability rank of 126 out of 129 loose figures that I track. And basically this means, compared to all the other figures, how available is this figure so far this year? So how often has a price been recorded for it? And so it turns out that Boba Fett is highly available. So the higher rank means that the figure is more common. That's basically what this is communicating. So high availability means it's not rare. You've always got a chance to buy it. There's lots of sales happening in the market. And the availability rank this year as compared to the lifetime is pretty close. It just differs by one, so it's not really significant. So there's not really been a cultural shift in the way the market sees Boba Fett this year or anything like that. The next rank there is the valuable rank. So it's, how expensive is this figure compared to all the other figures in the set of 129. And so it turns out that it's a little bit more than the middle. So basically the higher rank means that something's more valuable. So this is ranked 80 out of 129. If it was 129, it would be ranked as the most expensive. If it was ranked 1 out of 129, it would mean it was the most common and therefore the cheapest figure. So Boba Fett kind of it's a popular figure. It's by no means scarce or rare, but it's that popularity, sometimes referred to as the Boba Fett tax, or the Fett tax, which adds a bit more of a cost for this figure compared to others. So the next part of this is, well, I call it the 50 percentile band price. I'll get into what that means more in just a second. But this number in the bold here is, it's not quite an average, but if you just want a figure, like if someone asks you off the cuff, oh, how much is a Boba Fett figure? This is kind of the figure that you can fall back to and say, well, it'll cost you about $50. So it's kind of a good ballpark number to assign to the value of Boba Fett in this case. And it's based on the 50 percentile band price, which I'll get into in just a second. Just below that, we've got more for fun than any real relevance. It just lists the last time that a price has been recorded for Boba Fett. In this case, it's just the 5th of September, which is just a few days ago. And the price for it was $40. And this up arrow and $8.25. Again, this is just more for fun than anything particularly useful. What it's saying is that the last price and how does it compare to the price that was just previous to that. So this $40 was $8 more than the previous price seen, which is a jump in 25%. It's almost like a stock market thing where, you know, the share price change day to day, and, you know, is it significant or not? It's almost just a bit of tongue-in-cheek playing around with that. I wouldn't put too much emphasis on what that is actually saying. Okay, so the next section below that is somewhat interesting, at least to some people, and that's to show all the variants of this loose figure that Star Wars Tracker understands and caters for. So in this case, we have a large percentage, or a larger amount of the total prices tracked the licensee Kenner. And really what that says is, if something is a Kenner licensee, it basically means that it's not being tagged as something more significant. So it's just a run-of-the-mill Star Wars figure that's not particularly interesting in terms of any licensee variant. The next one across is a Lily Letty variant, which in this case, you know, is rather significant. So a Lily Letty Boba Fett, quite scarce and sought after, and you know, being quite rare. You can see at a glance that, you know, I've only recorded 49 instances of them compared to the many thousands of the run-in-the-mill version of Boba Fett. Similarly, the Meccano version of that, there's even less. I've even recorded POC PBP versions of Boba Fett, which, you know, have even less numbers assigned to them. So you can further fine-tune the results here. If you're in the market for a Lily Letty Boba Fett, then you can click on this link and it'll rearrange all the statistics, just showing you the prices for Lily Letty, which I'll do in a second. Okay, so moving on, below that we start to get to some more interesting part of the price guide, and this particular table is what I find using the most help when I'm trying to gauge a price for how much to sell something for or how much to spend on something. So let me go through this in a little bit of detail, because I quite often get a few questions about these percentile bands and what this is actually communicating. So to firstly explain the table, across the top I have the year which the prices were recorded in, so all the way back to about halfway through 2013, and then every year since. And then in brackets is the number of price points that are recorded within that year. So when Star Wars Tracker began in 2013, there was just 18 that I recorded, and then the next year was several hundred. The year after that was almost double the amount, and after that it's kind of stayed in the many multiples of hundreds of points. So basically, that's saying that there's more than one price a day that's being collected for Boba Fett. So this figure is pretty well represented, and the pricing data can be relied on as being pretty accurate, a good sampling of what happens for this loose figure. So that's across the top, and then down the left hand side here we have the percentile bands. So these bands go all the way up to a 100% band and all the way down at the bottom a 10% band. So let me spend a minute or two trying to explain what this is saying. So imagine all the prices that are recorded in a particular year. If you lined them up from the lowest price paid to the most expensive price paid, and then if you divided those prices up into equal divisions so that you had 10 different bands of prices where there's sort of equal amounts of prices in each band, then you end up with this situation where, let me go through an example of, say, well, let's do 2024, why not? So the 10% band is saying that if you line up all those prices that you saw and you took the prices that had the lowest amount, the first 10% of those prices would have been $29.88 or less. If you look at the 20% band, again with all those prices lined up from lowest to highest, 20% of those prices would have been $35.29 or less. If we just skip a few bands and go up to, say, the 90% band, so now we're looking at all the prices lined up from the lowest to the highest, and we're saying that 90% of them, from the lowest up to the top 90%, the most you would expect to pay is $89.86. And then the 100% band is basically saying, look, line all of them up, and what's the highest price that you saw after lining them all up in order? And that's saying that the highest price I saw was a bit over $2,500 for one Boba Fett figure. So I hope you followed that, and the implications of that are quite helpful, I think. So what I like to do is I look at the 50% band and see a price of $49.79. So why I like the 50% band is it's like basically for half the prices out there, or half the figures that were in the market and sold, half the figures were $49.79 or less. So to me, that says that this is a good ballpark number for a Boba Fett figure. So it could be more, it could be less, but if you just want something around average condition or what you would expect to pay, if you weren't after some really mint example but didn't want a beta figure, if you budgeted for about $50, then you should be able to get something quite reasonable. Alternatively, if you want an example that's a little bit better than the rest but still not gem mint, then I might be looking at the 70 or 80% band, and I might need to budget between $60 or $70 to get a little bit better example of one. So I hope that makes sense. If not, get in touch and I'll try and explain it another way. But the main advantage that using percentile bands to express statistics is that it kind of takes out the skewing that really high outlier numbers or really low outright numbers can have on taking an arithmetic mean average price. So for example, if you just wanted to report an average price, which is what a lot of price guides do and what people quote, when they say how much something's worth, I just take the average. In this case, if you took the average, this price of $2,500 would be included in the average. So just to recap, average is adding up all the prices and dividing by how many prices that you saw. If $2,500 gets included in that, it's going to artificially skew up what the average price was. And so it unfortunately means that someone's telling you that something's got a higher average price than what you would really expect in reality. So if we had an average next to here, if we put it next to the 50 percentile band price, it might actually have crept up like to $55 or $60 instead of the 50 because of the overarching influence that that $2,500 had. So again, I hope I've kind of explained that. If not, get in touch. I can try and explain it a different way. But I think percentile bands are a really powerful way to express statistics and give you a more accurate, a more real world dicing up of the numbers to help you decide how much something's actually really worth, especially when you have in your mind like an idea of what kind of condition item you're actually after. So the other thing I like to look at on this table is just to see how things have changed through the years. And there's probably three ways that I scan this table to just sort of get some interesting insight. So the first is to look at the 10% band through the years. And this tells me, what's the lowest amount of money that people have sort of paid for this figure through the years. And so back in the beginning in 2013, you could expect to just pay like $10 to get like a pretty bad example of a figure. But if you jump through the years, so it climbs up to 15, suddenly we're at 20 to 25. And at the current time in 2024, it's going to be very hard for you to find an example of a Boba Fett figure under $30. Whereas, in years gone by, a decade ago, $30 would have got you a pretty gem mint example of a Boba Fett. So I find that quite illuminating, just looking at this percentile band table like that. Likewise, I like looking at the 50% band table and just seeing how much that jumps when you're looking at like just a reasonably average figure, nothing too special, but you don't want a beta. Back when my stats began in 2013, you could expect to spend around the $17 mark to get something fairly nice and decent, but that's jumped up to $50 today. So more than doubling in price just to get sort of a same kind of condition example. And then need to be reasonably careful with this top row, but again, just for almost for fun, really. In the beginning, the most expensive example that I ever saw in the market was something for $33. The next year, it jumped to $570. I guess I'd probably discard 2013 because there's only 18 examples. But so certainly from 2014 onwards, the most expensive Boba Fett that I saw in public sales for sale was almost $600. But compare that to now, it's $2,500 is the most expensive example. So it certainly shows that things have changed a lot. People are finding ways to describe, well, in particular Boba Fett, that appeals to certain people in certain ways, that they are willing to value things more. Potentially that's it. But as everyone knows, that a lot of people have come into the hobby since 2014 with the re-release of movies, or the Force Awakens and the trilogy, and COVID. When COVID hit, that did some quite mind-boggling things to prices, to put it frankly. But anyway, so that's the percentile band data, which I think is the most useful part of the price guides. So below that, you have a scatter chart of the prices, and you can click on different years to essentially pull in all these data points and see them visually and just see how they compare. So let's just stick on 2023 for a minute. So we're looking at all these 459 data points here, and most of them are within this 0 to 500 range, but a couple are out here just way up the top. And if you mouse over those, you get a little bit more detail about it, and it starts to become a little bit more obvious what's going on. So these data points here are for Lily Letty Boba Fett's, which are the ones that have the removable rocket, only made in Mexico and they're quite unique and they speak to collectors. There's a bit of a throwback to the rocket firing Boba Fett that was never released. The Lily Letty one is, the next best one that people can get in that kind of ilk. So they do command a high price when you can get them. And similarly for 2024 this year, if we mouse over these ones, I'm sure these are all Lily Letty ones as well. This one down here is a Kenner one. So we might try and see if we can find out what's going on with that one. Sold for $425. Okay, so below the scattered chart, we go even deeper into the pricing. So kind of notice that it kind of goes from top down. So we've got very high level figures up the top here, and some high level statistics with some ranking, giving you a solid number here, just something to anchor yourself with. And then a bit of a expression of the licensee variation within this figure, which can help to account for any volatility in pricing that we see in the percentile band table. And then seeing that visually, and now we're into the nuts and bolts of all the data points that make up all the above. So in 2024, we can start getting some actual, data point level information here. So we get sale dates, we get the licensee of the figure that was sold, the location it was sold, what market it was sold. So most of the prices are, as you can guess, from eBay. Sale price that was sold for, and then the home currency price. So that's the sale price, and then if needed, converted into what your home price is. So I went and set my home currency to be US dollars. So in this case, my home price is USD, and so the two numbers are the same here. We'll see some examples where that's not the case, so I'll point that out in a second. And then we've also got whether the figure is graded or not. So I think I'm going to cover that in a separate video, just to keep these videos as short as possible, even though this one is getting up to almost half an hour now. And then on the right here, we've got even more details where you can go to the primary source of where that sale happened. And then I also store, where possible, the images of the figure in question. So let's just have a click on a couple here. So we've got the very last one we've seen on the 5th of September is this one from the from the USA, sold for $40 US. So this carbonite storage is a bit of a play on the term of Han Solo was frozen in carbonite, so stored forever kind of thing. That's kind of where I was going with carbonite storage. So all these pictures are frozen in the app forever. So when the listing disappears from eBay, this carbonite storage will allow you to go back and see the condition of the item. So this one, it actually looks in pretty good condition. There's not too much paint wear anywhere. So yep, that's not a bad one. $40 for that. Let's have a look at this next one for $32 then. So maybe a little less in condition, like a few paint rubs there. Let's see if we can find something that's got quite a low number. Actually, let me just dwell on this one. So this one sold in the UK for £50, and so that's been converted into my home currency of $66.12. So that's kind of how that works, if that makes sense. So here we've got one sold for just $20 in the US, and we'll have a look, and here we can see, yeah, so that's on the lower end of things, like a lot of the paint's been rubbed off here. Quite some rubbing everywhere, and yeah, so that's kind of how there's a correlation between price and condition, and the percentile bands try to capture that sometimes elusive concept. Okay, so let's see if we can find this one for $425. So that's this one here. And so mousing over these rows will also give you a little bit more context about the sale, and we can read there that it was one of these blue painted head Boba Fett's. So if we go and have a look at the picture, so it takes a little bit of practice to distinguish these things. It's not always obvious from pictures, especially if they're bad pictures, but this is an example of where the helmet and the head has been painted rather than molded in blue plastic. And people have identified this variant. I don't know exactly when, but in recent years, people have picked up on it and decided that, oh yeah, I've got to have one of those. And they are pretty scarce. So when they do pop up, people end up spending a lot of money on them and driving the price up. And that's why they end up being, you know, $425 instead of around the $50 mark or somewhere around that range. So that's that bit of an outlier there. So yeah, there's plenty of prices here that you can delve into, and you know, clicking on the carbonite storage or this primary source link goes back to, you know, in this case it would have been the eBay listing for as long as eBay keeps listings around, which I think is 90 days. It seems to always just be 90 days. But yeah, the carbonite storage aspect is, you know, really, really helpful to go and see the condition of these things and see why a price made sense when the eBay link has long since died. Okay, so that's the full pricing details screen in Star Wars Tracker, and all the price guide entries kind of follow this same template of having overall statistics, a reference picture, then the percentile band table, and then the scatter chart, and then the bottom level, low level raw data view of things. Okay, so I think I'm going to leave it there, and we're going to pick up more on how to read these pricing pages with a few more of these licensee options here, and I haven't even touched on the way to look up graded prices. So I think we're going to cover that in the next video. All right, until then, happy collecting.